I finally leveled up Odette, so it's time to have a look at some of the teams that she can play with. I still don't have a Stellar support set right now, that's in the works, but I have in fact crowned her skill, and I have taken her ult up to level 8, so I think we're in a good spot to just talk about her. First kind of team that I want to look at are the Cyno teams, because obviously he is a character who received a whole bunch of buffs during the Sandy release, but he obviously didn't really have any Stellar Conduct teams that he could play with until now. Let's remind ourselves what Cyno's buffs are. The big ticket item is now that when you use Cyno's skill, he actually gets into his ult form for 6 seconds. This works in every team, it's not just Stellar Conduct. Otherwise, his Duststalker bolts become Stellar bolts and they do direct Stellar Conduct damage. His A4 passive also gives him some big EM scaling. C1 gives him plus 200 EM when he ults while in a Stellar Conduct field, but also the next character you swap to also gets plus 200 EM for what would have been the remaining duration of his ult. Should note that once you swap out of the character that you swapped into after Cyno, they still actually keep the plus 200 EM, so it seems like you'll need to figure out what kind of rotation you want to use so that you're not, let's say, giving it to a buffer like Xilonen by accident. And this requires his proper ult form, by the way, so you will actually need to use his ult. The buffed skill doesn't count. C2 just makes anyone who has that plus 200 EM from his C1 also get plus 16 stellar percent on their normal attacks or charge attacks, notably not their skill, so this constellation is actually worthless if you swap to Miko or Odette. In fact, now that I think about it properly for the first time ever, this constellation seems to be proposing that you play some kind of quick swap double on-field, I don't know, Sandy Cyno team, I guess. C4 is a huge energy restore for Cyno. The buff to C4 by itself is not as much as C2 Xilonen, but it is on top of the energy that you could already get if you could trigger Stellar Conduct with Cyno while it is proper ult form. That being said though, I get the feeling it's actually not that reliable to do that, because in a double Electro team, well, you're going to have an Electro aura for the most part. So yeah, that's probably not going to work at all. So maybe that's why they gave him this alternative, easier way to just get a ton of energy back. And finally, there's C6, which I think is just getting Stellar Conduct scaling on the things that basically happen normally with C6. So long as Cyno has that plus 200 EM from his C1, I think that's just how that works. This is a pretty comprehensive adjustment to his kit though, in my opinion, most importantly making him playable even if you don't have his ult ready. That's what I really like about the Cyno buffs. Honestly, all of the extra Stellar Conduct DPS shenanigans, those are just additional, it's cool, whatever, who cares. But make no mistake, Cyno is not just a Stellar Conduct DPS, he's always been absolutely perfectly fine in Quick Bloom teams. But unlike God Miko, whose majority of buffs affected all of her teams and only some of them were for Stellar memes, it does actually seem like the majority of Cyno's buffs are in fact Stellar memes. Hello everyone, welcome back. Before we continue, I just want to remind you all to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because as always, your support will help combat the YouTube algorithm. Now, I wanted to get into some observations about the various Stellar Cyno teams, so let's get into it. First thing is to reiterate what I mentioned in the Odette First Impressions video from a couple of days ago. For me, the Stellar Cyno team is running double Electro, which means I won't have any Cryo Aura for the most part. So not only does TF not work for me, it doesn't seem like Cryo Resonance would be available either. This isn't exactly deal-breaking for how fun he is, but it did take me a bit to get used to Cyno gameplay where I actually do see his entire normal attack string for the first time ever, so if you are a Gilded Dreams Cyno main, then nothing has changed for you. Some of my usual shenanigans though, like going skill into ult first, still seems to make sense insofar as a way of funneling energy to him, but also because his first NC estate tends to be delayed compared to the subsequent ones, so getting the first mortuary right, i.e. the skill pounce thing, that doesn't result in Duststalker bolts, but it doesn't also immediately brick his DPS rotation, whilst I guess also giving him some energy particles, maybe? This is a double Electro team after all. Based on my observation, there are a lot of particles flying around from Electro Resonance alone. Look, I haven't exactly built Cyno for all that much energy recharge. I only have like 112 and some change on him. But for me at least, because the Cyno team is featuring my C2 R1 Xilonen, I am of course getting that energy restore that I think a lot of the Cyno mains who are C4+, they would have some experience with. What I also have is C1 Cyno, so I have been looking into how I would use this constellation, and like I mentioned, it seems like once you swap out of Cyno to your next character, that character holds onto the plus 200 EM. So ideally, I swap out of Cyno into either Odette or Miko. For me, it seems obviously to make the most sense to swap to Miko, not just because more buffs to C6 God Miko obviously makes more sense, but I'd rather have Miko do her thing before Xilonen in this rotation so that I can give both Miko and Cyno the Electro Scroll buff. If I were to swap to Odette before Xilonen, I run the risk of accidentally doing Cryo Swirls afterwards, which are of course completely worthless for this team. But one thing that a lot of TCers have been saying about Odette is that her ult isn't all that useful. That, at the end of the day, her ult is a DPS loss for the team. See, Odette's ult does 3 things. It actually does some cryo damage, but not direct stellar damage. It does summon her dance double, which means you don't have to EE again, you can just E move on. And it gives her some stellar percent damage scaling off levels, of which I've of course left her ult at level 8, so we are looking at plus 42 stellar percent for just herself though. It's not a team buff, it's a self buff. Basically, folks have been citing the lack of direct stellar damage as the primary reason why her ult just isn't worth it, and then also there's the fact that it only buffs herself and not the team. But as you can see here in a comparison of the rotation that I mentioned for the StellarCyno team, one side is using Odette's ult and the other side isn't. Spoiler alert, I seem to be getting a notable team DPS increase running Odette's ult. Now, granted, for some reason, Miko decided to pop off extra hard, but the difference in her own personal DPS was around 7.5k, so taking that into account, along with Cyno doing another 2k more DPS for some reason, there's still some 10k more DPS that Odette is doing that is actually making the difference. So at least in this team, seems to me like her ult is something worth using, even if I only have enough energy for her to use it every other rotation. We'll see if this stays the same when I get that stellar support set on Odette. But meanwhile, a few more things I wanted to have a look at before wrapping up this video. There is a StellarCyno team that can actually use TF, and that's of course going to be Rhymegrass. Hopefully Rhymegrass becomes a real reaction, but in the meantime, Cyno can both Stellar Conduct and Aggravate, so that's actually pretty nice. But Stellar Bolts don't apply Electro, and therefore they can't Aggravate, so it is just his normal attacks that are in fact aggravating. I could still run Cyno and God Miko together, but then there'd be no healer, so I would run Baiju instead of Nahida. Seems like C2's Baiju's Dendro app, not in conjunction with something like his ult, is in fact barely enough Dendro app for this team to still get TF working, but I did notice a bit of mistiming resulting in not getting Stellar Bolts if I was a little bit too quick on the draw. Otherwise, you can run Xilonen and Nahida, but trying to get the Electro Scrolls are just going to end up being a meme. Meanwhile, I want to also talk about how C2 R1 Xilonen is by far and wide the best support for this team, at least for me, because Odette also gets plus 60 crit damage, and the rotation gets really fast. I also wonder if C0 Xilonen is still the best support, since Electro Scroll and Res Shred will work. Remember, Odette doesn't actually need scroll buffs, but still wants a Res Shred, so, you know, once again, Miko into Xilonen in the rotation does make a lot of sense. C55 Chi-Chi is around about 40k team DPS loss. Sucrose may be the GOAT in general, but I'm not entirely sure what the rotation is supposed to be with this team, and I seem to get another 20k less DPS still. Escoffier doesn't affect Cyno and Miko, and of course, CMC is an on-fielder in Stellar Conduct teams. Hell, I could easily get more damage running Rosaria than running Sucrose, so I'm really unsure about the Sucrose angle at the present moment. And finally, seems like despite the A4 passive giving Stellar Bolts 600% EM scaling, running EM artifacts seems to be worse than running attack artifacts. I think the big reason for that is because in the StellarCyno team, I seem to have Cyno getting a whole heap of EM from other sources. First off, his ult just straight up gives 100 EM. Ballad of the Fjords gives 240 EM for the team because we have Electro, Cryo, and Geo, i.e. 3 elements, which is also another reason why Chi-Chi is a DPS loss. Cyno's C1 is plus 200 EM, and of course Miko's C2 is also plus 200 EM, so long as her turrets are of course near each other. So it is less to do with how great the scaling of that particular passive is, and just more to do with how hilariously saturated Cyno's EM just ends up being by the time we're popping off with his ult. Baseline, I already have some 213 EM in the build, that of course then goes up to 433 thanks to Battle of the Fjords, and eventually after all of this is said and done, I somehow end up with 987 EM. The math ain't exactly mathing, but look, I ain't gonna dispute it. But if I were to use an EM sand, my attack would be under 2k, so I think that's the balance that I am in fact working with. Okay, I think that'll do it for today's video. In summary, thanks to the release of Odette, Cyno is now still pretty fun to play, and his Stellar Conduct teams are of course a lot stronger. When I get an actually good Stellar support set on Odette, I'll of course revisit the DPS aspect of these teams, but even now, the team is actually working quite well in my opinion. Obviously, in my case, they're getting carried by God Miko, but it does seem like they're still doing well regardless of that. The big question is whether I'll end up not playing Sandy anymore in favor of Cyno, because Cyno's gameplay is more exciting than Sandy in my opinion, but not only is Sandy a far more based personality, she is quite hilarious in her own right, she does seem to be a lot stronger too, so we'll just have to see. And I am of course comparing to a Sandy with Mailed Flower, an event weapon, versus Cyno with R5 Battle of the Fjords, Battle Pass weapon. Hey, it is what it is. Anyway, let me just think about all of this in the comments below. Are you playing a lot of Cyno in Stellar Conduct? Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
The side of the box of the snowflakes. Potted dust. Nowhere to run. Judgment is upon you. You stay condemned. Their penance is due. Come at me again. You stay condemned.